Hi, so this is the Dewalt 735. It's one of the best thickness planers you can get your hands on. For what it is, it kind of sits between some of the more industrial size thicknesses you can get and some of the cheaper, more frail systems that you can get at your big box store. And I'm so glad I managed to get my hands on one of them. This is probably the best thing I've found on Facebook Marketplace. So today I'm going to have a bit of a play with it and I'm going to make an infeed table so then we can ultimately feed in pieces that require just that little bit more support as they come through, but also something that's removable and can be tossed in and out depending on if I want to put a sled through it or whatever. The other thing I'm going to be doing is testing out my new camera. I recently picked up an A7 IV from Sony. I've been looking at this camera forever, so I'm also having a play with that. So watch the video, tell me if you think I'm getting better at this whole video quality thing. Check out what I'm making as far as the infield table goes, and I'll see you at the end. Let's go. So when I bought this thicknesser, it already came with an extended table, and that's effectively what we're going to be building today. The one that came with it was fairly scratched up. You can't really see it in the shot, but it's about time for a rebuild. So we're going to use melamine plywood. I use this, as you can already see, on the outfeed table itself. It's an excellent plywood when it comes to making workbenches. Glue doesn't really stick to it. It's great for things like oil and other residues that might come off of stuff, but for this purpose, it's really useful because it's quite slippery, which means that anything you put on this surface is going to move through the thicknesser as good as it could do, and of course I can also add some paste wax to it, which you'll see at the end, to really get it to a point where it's useful. Now you'll see here in a second my table saw was not playing the game that day. It decided it wanted to roll and move while I was pushing stuff through it, so here I'm just running it through as an extra pass to make sure that I don't have a bit of a squirrely corner there. So we're going to use a offcut that was left over from when I made that Pacific folding bar last year. This is just one of the hardwood floorboards that was left over. You can see some of the nail holes, and it's still got the tongue and groove left on it. So we'll just start by ripping that off, get a square edge, and then from there I'll run it through, get thinner strips. The big issue with this one, you can already see very clear as day, is there's a reason I didn't use it, and it was because it is bowed really badly. You can see here as I hold it up, it's bowed worse than a cricket bat. It's ridiculous. So my thought was, at least at the time, run it through the table saw, run it into smaller strips, and then perhaps those strips will be a bit more compliant when I'm trying to attach it to the side or something. We'll see how that goes, but at this point in time I'm probably incorrectly optimistic at how this is going to go. So I used a offcut of that melamine to essentially establish the width that I wanted to rip these to, and here I go, just ripping those down to 18 millimeters overall. This will give us 2 and a bit strips left over once this piece is cut up, but my kind of aim across the board at the moment is trying to get rid of as many of these useless pieces that are sitting in my small garage, because I need to make way for some other stuff that's going to happen soon. Watch this space. So I'll use the thicknesser to kind of bring it to that final width. Overall, all those kind of nail holes and any other kind of imperfections on the surface aren't going to be an issue, and it really wouldn't be a Fairburn Furnishings video without me flipping my miter saw on this table. I love doing this, but at the same time I'm showing it to you because I'm super proud of the mechanism I came up with, so you have to put up with that for a few more videos, I guess. But anyway, I'll use the miter saw to cut these pieces to length, and this will give me the 2 long sides and then obviously the short side needed to edge frame this piece. And you can already see how wonky this piece already is, but my optimism, while somewhat misplaced, I'd say it did kind of come to fruition that I was able to get these pieces into line. You'll see in a sec. For the moment, however, I'm going to probably the first time I've ever used the full ripping capacity, cross-cutting capacity of this miter saw. So I was quite happy about that, because you buy a big saw like this, you kind of have a purpose to use it for, and in this instance I'm just taking the factory paint that sits on there just to protect the edges of your plywood, just ripping that away, getting a far more square surface. Because of what this is going to do, it really doesn't matter how perfectly square these corners are, but it does definitely help with the edge banding. Speaking of, mistake number 3001 on this project, I didn't film myself attaching the edge banding. I'm not sure why. I've had 2 cameras set up pointing at me at this point, and I have no idea why neither of them actually managed to film what I did. So you can kind of see from this shot, I've just attached them with glue, but you can see those screws that I've just thrown in, just pre-drilled, countersunked, and then drove those screws home, and they held the edge banding as it dried. But the other part of it as well is that, given this is going to be a piece of kind of workshop furniture, it also needs kind of that little extra strength that if I knock it with a piece of something, that it's not just going to rip straight off. Speaking of workshop furniture, I'll throw these smaller offcuts that I'm going to use to hold the table in place. I'm just going to square up an edge using my block plane. The main reason that we're going to attach these is just to stop the table from sliding forward or backwards as something goes through. So this setup is not designed to be a sled, it's designed to just be an extended kind of table fence. So yeah, you don't want it moving around. I then attach these pieces with some 2-part epoxy. The 2-part epoxy seems to be one of the kind of only things I've seen actually really works well with adhering to that melamine. And then I'll throw some screws in just to keep it there whilst I'm waiting for it to dry. This is a bit of recycling at its best. These were the screws that I found in the original table. There's no reason I can't just put them straight back in. Once that's done, I'm going to grab some 240 grit sandpaper. I'm going to knock the edges off of what is left of that edge banding, particularly because melamine can be kind of the worst when it comes to giving you paper cuts and little kind of tiny cuts as you run your hand along its edge. I would worry mostly about just making sure you've taken any of those harsh edges off before you, say, apply finish. In this case, I'm going to apply wax, where the cloth that I use is not going to be thick enough to stop, say, a splinter from that melamine coming through. So knock the edges off, and I hope you'll be fine. And just before we apply finish, just before we kind of lock it all in, I'm just going to give it a quick test fit. As you can see, it does exactly what it needs to. It enters table mode, if you will.
It's voice activated. Table, resume table mode.
And so, because of that, we'll apply some cabinet maker's wax, which is basically a paste wax. I've used it quite a bit. It's what I can find in our local big box store, good old Bunnings. So I highly recommend it. It has the same properties that you'd expect out of a good paste wax. It does provide a good surface that's quite kind of well lubricated. It does not tend to kind of leave a residue that attracts sawdust or anything like that, but you do need to keep maintaining it over time. It does kind of lose its slipperiness eventually, but I use this for all my melamine tops, and I also use it on kind of any of the tools that need a bit of extra, bit more of a slippery surface. So it's easily applied. Just grab a rag and just a little bit of that wax and just keep going over all those surfaces. I do and have used plenty of times it as a sealant, but if you're going to use it as a sealant, you probably need to apply about 3 coats in this case, because this is going to consistently be towed down and wiped down and so on as I'm using it in the shop. I'm just applying 1 coat here, but kind of each to their own. It'll be probably relatively frequent that I'm going back and applying a bit of paste wax to the top surface, really to make sure that anything that's going into that table saw is not snagging in any way, shape or form on the table. And there we go. Kind of final run through, making sure it all sits where I want it to, and we'll give it a bit of a test run. So there it is. The timber being super twisted made this one just that little bit more interesting. I made every mistake under the sun making this table, but I tell you what, it did still turn out well enough that I'm willing to just throw this around the shop. And I suppose that's the thing, it's shop furniture. It is going to get dinged up, it's going to get scratched, it's going to get chipped, but at the same time, that's kind of the point, isn't it? We like to make stuff. I'm super glad I got an opportunity to use the new planer, and I got to use my new camera. It was a great day. I will see you on the next one. Cheers.